All right, now we're going to dig into the Working with Students board. So I'm going to first just talk you through some of the ways that you could use this board, and then we're going to go through each card in the how to use this board section and kind of set up a very basic workflow that you can use for almost any project that involves student collaboration. So first of all, you could be using this board with one student or multiple students. So some examples of why you might use this board with multiple students are if you have a small research group or either of grad students or undergrads that are working together on a project. You could be working as a thesis supervisor, and this would be the board where you're helping your student to see how to break down the thesis and meet deadlines for different parts of the thesis. Really, the sky's the limit here, although groups of, like, I really do think that groups of more than, I don't know, 5 or 7 would be too big for collaboration on a board like this. That probably is a different scale of project management. But when you're working with, a handful of students on a project, maybe they're your undergrad researchers, or you have a little research team or a lab team, then this is a great way to collaborate with those students. Another thing you might use this for is for working on a co-authored piece of writing, right, that you're writing with one of your students. All right, so I have a list here that we're going to walk through for all the steps of how to collaborate with students using a Trello board. So step 1, everybody needs to get Trello, okay? So you can just send them to Trello.com and they will be able to set up their own Trello account. It's free, it's always free. So so here we have each team member needs to go to Trello.com and sign up for a free account. So that is step number 1. Then step number 2, you want to create a team or share the board. So I have a link here it's very simple to create a team. I'm going to give you a little preview of it here, but Trello has a really great knowledge base, and this is the article from their knowledge base that is about how to create a team. Now, the reason that you would create a team rather than just singularly add people to the board is if it's a group of people that you're going to be maybe creating more boards with. Okay, so a lot of times once we start to do project management with Trello, we see the benefit, and then you might have multiple boards with a team of students, right? You might have all your undergraduate researchers on this board, and then you take on another project, or you decide to write something, and this board is about doing the research, and then the write-up maybe needs another, needs like a writing project board. Well, it's much easier if you have a bunch of students like that, a group of people, to create a team. And then when you create a new board, instead of creating a personal board, you can see up here where it says personal, you're going to create a team board. Okay, so there's my Kathy Mazak team. And actually, let me show you right there. This is how you create a team. You click on where it says personal up here in the corner, and you click create team. You give your team a name and a description, and you create it. And then you will be adding people to that team. Regardless, your students need to have Trello accounts for you to do any of this. So that needs to get done. If you think, you don't really need to create a team if it's just one other person. You can just share the board with that person or put that person as a member of the board, okay? And you'll see there's yourself, right? And if you want to share the board, you're going to write the email address of the person or the name. If the person has created their Trello account, it will autofill there with their Trello name. And then you can send an invitation for that person to join the board, and they'll get that invitation. If you put in their email, they should get it to their email. But if you just put in their Trello name, then they'll get a notification in their Trello board, which is behind this video. You can see the little notifications, which are the red bell icon in the upper right. Alternatively, you can invite people to join your board as a member with a link that you create. You can copy and paste and send that. So that's how you add your team to the board. Either you need to create a team and then switch the board to the name of the team right here, or you can share the board with 1 or 2 people, and there might not be a need to necessarily create a team. Okay, so then the next step is to set up notifications, all right? So this is copied from Trello's help, so it gives you the step-by-step, and if you're a student watching this video, this is going to explain it all for you. So basically, you can receive Trello notifications in different ways. So one way is that on a card, you can set up, you can put yourself to watch the card, all right? So you want to set up your notifications in Trello. I get notifications for Trello on my phone through the Trello app. You can also set up that every time something happens in Trello that you get notified, you get an email, which I highly recommend you do not do. That will be way too many emails. And then also you'll be, again, I'm just moving this window here because the notification bell, red bell icon is under there. So that's where you'll be able to see all your notifications of anything that happens on a card that you are watching, all right? So let me get back there. So when you're watching a card, you're going to get notifications for all the comments that other users make on that card. If you're not watching the card, then you'll only get notifications for comments that you're tagged in. Okay, we'll talk about tagging in a minute. If the due date changes or anything happens to the due date, like somebody checks off that the thing is complete, you'll get a notification for that if you have the card set up to watch. If the card is moved, so for example, if the card moves from the to-do list to the doing list, you'll get a notification about that. And then you can also set up, besides just watching cards, you can also set up your boards to be watched. So then if you set up, when you're watching a list or a board, you'll get the same notifications about cards, but for all the cards in a list or on the board. And you'll get notifications for newly created cards. Okay, so at any time you'll get notifications when you are mentioned in a comment with the @ symbol tagging, when you're added to a card, a board, or a team, when you're mentioned in a checklist item, or if one of your boards is closed. Okay, so for more about receiving Trello notifications, I have a linked up to the Help Center. And so you want to make sure that everybody who is using Trello, so if you're a student who is new to Trello, that they go through and understand how notifications work so that they don't miss anything. So besides watching the cards or watching lists, okay, so you can right-click to watch a list, I want to show you how you can communicate with your students through the Trello cards themselves. So you can see on the face of this card, you see my little picture there. It's kind of an old picture that needs to get changed. So one way that you can communicate with your students and other board members is to put them as members of a card. And that's going to kind of hint to them, or show them that this is something that you and that other student are working on together, or maybe that is not maybe you're not a member of the card at all, maybe it's just the student. So the way you do this is you click on members, and anybody who has been invited to the board or is on the team will come up here as possible members. You might need to start typing their names and then select them. And then they will be members of the card, all right? And that is like the equivalent of assigning something to someone, right? That gives them the heads up that, like, okay, this is my card. These are things that I need to do. Now, another way that you're going to communicate with your students through the board is using tagging. So we just use a regular @ symbol tag, and I don't have any other members on this board and I can't tag myself, so I'll just pretend my pretend student's name is Amy. And so she, you know, if I wanted to tag Amy in something, I would @ her, and it will automatically kind of actually turn black, which will show you that like it's linked up to Amy's notifications, and then you can communicate, you know, a message there. So using this @ symbol is another way to make sure that people get notifications. And you can use that @ symbol in any comment, but you can also use it at the end of a checklist item to assign the work to a particular person, okay? So you might have a checklist with multiple items, and you can have each item assigned to a different person who is a member of the card or a member of the team. All right, so those are lots of different ways that we can communicate through the notifications in Trello and assign things to people in a particular way. So the other thing that you want to do with your students when you're communicating about a project is to create a workflow. So this board has a super simple workflow that I'm going to talk you through in a minute. You should modify it to fit your own group's needs. Okay, so I wrote you a little checklist here. Customize the workflow on this board to meet your needs. Create a card explaining the workflow to all board users. So you might want to leave this how to use this board list here and put a card called board workflow, and in the description you explain what the workflow is. Okay, so I'm going to show you the workflow here. Basically we have a simple to-do, doing, done type of structure. And so what you could do is you list all the to-dos in your project here on separate cards, and then you can assign them to people, right, by making them members of the card. And then that person can come into Trello and say, okay, well, I can see that this thing was assigned to me, and I'm ready to work on that. So I'm going to move it to the doing column. And then maybe on here, I'll explain what template cards are in a second. Maybe there's a checklist, and the person, you know, works through the things assigned to them on the checklist, and they're like, okay, great, I'm done all those things. I'm going to click off all of that, and then I will move it to the done column. And what this gives you is a nice little workflow so that you can see what there is to do, what each person is working on at the moment, and then what things are done. And maybe you're going to want to move this done list all the way over here. It's fine, no matter what, no matter where you want to put it. The same with the how to use this board. If you don't want to take up too much left side of the screen space, this could be moved in another place. So I also added here, thinking about what it might be like, you know, to use a board with a student. You could have a column especially for questions, and you could have another column for kind of like ideas related to the project that that you want to talk about in a meeting. Now you could also maybe have a meetings column, and you could have you could create cards with notes from your meeting, give them, you know, from a meeting on a certain day. That's what the X's are representing there. And then you could have a nice running list of meeting notes, all archived in one place. All right, let's talk about some other tools you can use to communicate through the Trello board with students. So one thing you can do is use color-coded labels. So you can imagine that if we were working on a project that was a research project, we could have labels for cards that were student work, professor work. If this was a board about writing or something where you need to give feedback to a student, then you could have the student be tagging things with waiting for feedback. And then I also love the idea of having template cards and having them labeled. So let me explain what that means. So I had created this one over here. And basically all it means is that if you have processes that you do over and over, so let's say, let's imagine that we're analyzing interviews and that there's, 10 in-depth interviews. You could have a template card for each one. And when somebody's ready to work on interview 5, they would just go ahead and they would copy this card and make sure that they keep the checklists and labels. And then you can actually move this to any place you want, but let's just leave it right in the same list there. And then that template with the same checklist that we need to do to analyze that particular interview. So let's say interview analysis for number 5. Then the analysis procedure is here, and a student or yourself, right, could be working through this checklist. Especially if you have these kind of repeated tasks, using a template card is a really great way to stabilize workflows and make sure that everybody knows what they're doing. And again, we probably would move this into the doing column while we're working on it. When it's checked off, we move it to done. All right, so another way that you could use the labels, let's imagine that we're working on a thesis. So I'm a student, like for example, for me, I have master's students and they work on theses. So let's imagine that we have the proposal there, and then I'll come in here and I'll tag it with the student's name. I'm gonna give it a due date. Okay, and I'm gonna give it a label. So I'll click label, student work, and then the student knows that this belongs to her, and when she's doing it, she's gonna move it here, and she'll be doing it, then maybe she'll move it to done, or maybe what she'll do is go back here, she's finished it, so she's gonna relabel it waiting for feedback. Okay, and maybe then she also gives a new deadline, a new deadline to you, which is, okay, she wants feedback by the 8th of March. And unchecks that. And then, since it's labeled with the orange, you know that you need to go in and work through the workflow as well. Now, if you want to, of course, you can, as we learned in the previous lessons, we can attach the actual proposal here, whether it's in Google Drive or on your computer or in Dropbox. You can add that right here so that you're not emailing versions of the proposal back and forth. All you're doing is using Trello to label it in different ways. The student might also write to you like, at Professor, this is ready. I especially want feedback on methodology, and it doesn't need to be an email. It can just be a little notification in Trello. So those are some examples of how to use color codes. You can let your imagination run wild with different things to do there. I've also included on this board additional resources. So, so here I have 2 links to 2 different blogs on the Trello website. Their blog is really great. If you're a student who's watching this video, I suggest you just go and read these 2 short blogs, which one is called the Trello Board Best Practices, and one is What is a Workflow and Why Do You Need It? And remember, if you change, or as you establish the board's workflow, you want to go ahead, create a workflow card, and take notes there, write out what the workflow is. That way, everybody knows what they should be doing. So if you're working on a thesis, You have cards for the different parts. You want to make sure you say, you know, create a card for each part of your thesis. Use the color-coded labels to identify what is waiting for feedback. You might even have, instead of doing, done, you could have that for the student and then that for the professor, right? And the proposal could move through each of those columns. It's up to you. You can create the workflows however you'd like. As I said before, this is a very simple one, but what's important is to communicate the board workflow. All right, so I encourage you to kind of let your imagination run wild. I'm sure there's many different things you could think of to create successful communication and set good expectations and keep to a timeline with your students by working together in Trello on a board like this.